Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by GlobalLogix. Our webinar today is on blockchain, a new technology that is taking the business world by storm. We're very glad you're with us today, and it looks like we've got a great crowd, so let's get started. First, let's start off with our agenda for today. We're going to cover some ground rules. I'm going to give you an introduction of today's presenter. And listen, we want you to participate, so get ready to send us your questions. We're going to have our presentation and then a live question and answer session at the end. Our ground rules are very simple. We've got everybody's audio muted today so that we can have a clean broadcast, which we will then be posting and sending out to everybody who registered for the webinar. We do want you to participate though, so please send us your questions via the question panel here in GoToWebinar. Next, let me introduce you to our presenter today. He is Charles J. Drobny Jr., or you can call him Chuck. He's the president and CEO of GlobalLogix. You can read a little bit about Chuck on the screen, but he's an expert in midstream oil and gas, industrial automation, SCADA, and the Internet of Things. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Chuck.
Hey guys, thanks for coming in today. Made this presentation a few weeks ago at the Remote Data Conferencing National Seminar in Denver. And it was pretty well received. It was a lot of very technical IT people, a lot of SCADA people. So those of you who are ready for a little bit of rock and rolling about some new things that are coming down the pike that are going, I guarantee, to affect everybody, you're in for a treat today. The blockchain, I think some of you or most all of you have heard of the blockchain. It's already taken business by storm. Those who start to ask questions of the major banks, the major trading houses, some people that are very deeply in with some governments and doing a lot of reading will recognize that this is just not some passing fad and that there are some very, very serious players in the background who are taking care of it or looking into it. Now, why are they taking care of it and looking into it now? Well, they are because they see what I see, and when I'm going to tell you what I see about the blockchain and why it's here to stay, and it's going to become even more important and much, much bigger. You know, those who really know what's going on, they're predicting that it's going to have a bigger impact on business in the next 10 years that the internet has had in the last 20 years. I mean, think about the magnitude of that statement. There are, I frequently ask people, well, what's the biggest transportation company in the world? And they give me some trucking company or some airline. And I say, no, it's Uber. And they don't own any vehicles. And they shake their head and say, oh my gosh, you're right. And then I ask them, would you believe that the biggest hotelier in the world, or the biggest hospitality company in the world, doesn't own any property? A lot of people say, nah, you're crazy. And then I say, well, it's Airbnb. And they realize, oh my gosh, because they've experienced the paradigm shift. And then when I tell them about the paradigm shift that they've experienced in retail marketing and ask them, who the biggest retailer in the world is, they start to guess and they say, as you're saying right now, oh, it's Amazon. So that's a huge impact upon business and how we operate that we've experienced from the internet. Totally transformed our lives, totally transformed the way we do business. And I'm telling you that I think the blockchain is going to have a bigger impact on that in the next 10 years than it's had in the last 20. So what is blockchain? All right. If you go on in Google and you do an internet search, you're going to get over 1 million hits about the blockchain. So if you try to find a 10 or 15 word description of the blockchain, thinking that, well, you'll absorb this, it would be the same thing as if you said, okay, I will transport somebody from the late 60s doing business, knew everything that was going on contemporarily, and I'm going to give them a 15 or 20 word paragraph to describe the internet and the impact that the internet's going to have in changing business and commerce. You'd say, well, that's not going to happen because people just can't wrap their arms around it. And I'm telling you, we're going to see the same thing with blockchain. So as you try to absorb what the blockchain is and how it works, please recognize that patience is the order of the day. This represents a paradigm shift in your thinking, and it will take a little while for it to sink in so that you can totally get what's going on. Okay, formally, blockchain is a public electronic ledger. Think ledger like a financial ledger, where the transactions are listed sequentially, and each transaction that's related to another transaction. But it's public. It's not just stored on one machine. It's a distributed ledger that's shared amongst various users who are participating in that blockchain. So that means it may be dozens, or probably more like hundreds or thousands of individual computers who are sharing that information and using it as necessary. But what this does, the blockchain does, is it creates and maintains an unchangeable record of all the transactions, and where each of those transactions is absolutely verifiable. And introduce you to a couple of words. One of them I had to look up was immutable. Immutable means we can verify the authenticity of the origination of that fact or that statement or that document. That's very important in any kind of record keeping. What's the original transaction? What's the original property record? What's the original registration of a piece of equipment? What's the original establishment of a medical record? Okay. Now, the blockchain is public. It's distributed amongst a lot of different machines, which means we don't have to rely on one centralized server. We don't have to rely on one part of a network that if it goes down or gets corrupted because it's not operating properly, that the whole system fails like we have right now in our contemporary business systems, okay? It's distributed amongst a lot of users. People can come on and come off from the blockchain, and the software or the code that runs the blockchain on the individual machine will connect and catch you up. Each transaction is linked to the previous transaction, and it's with a code or hash or a long code word that's about a 256-bit confirmation code using all the characters in the alphabet and on the keyboard, upper and lower case, numbers and letters, such that it can absolutely verify the accuracy and the appropriate nature of each transaction relating to the previous one. Now you're looking and saying, okay, what is that going to do for us? Well, here we go. What it's going to do is going to establish trust. And the whole issue about trust is, has this action been completed? Is this record really accurate? Does the next step that we have to take really matter according to the plan that we have? Think about trust. Trust is the basis for the financial systems, the business systems, and everything else that we have. If you don't have trust that what you agree with someone else to accomplish for you, the system's going to fall down. I always tell people, take that dollar bill out of your pocket. Are you going to take that dollar bill and use it because it's backed by the full faith and credit of the federal government? And they look at me and go, well, no, that's not really why it is. What they say, on the other hand, is, I'm going to use this dollar and I'll accept those dollars from you for something because I know that I can take this dollar and walk down the street and buy a cup of coffee at Starbucks, and they'll take that dollar. Well, maybe it'll be a half a cup at Starbucks based upon what the prices are these days. It's trust. When I think about blockchain, and when you think about blockchain, I want you to consider that trust is very, very important, because trust is the central focus behind the blockchain. That's what the blockchain establishes in all these records. Now, there's a financial aspect to this, and you see a lot about the blockchain that you first appear, and I haven't used that word yet, but trust is a basis behind financial systems. Now, all business has a financial component to it, because that's the way we measure and transfer value based upon finances and numbers. Okay, but blockchain is different from the way we establish trust today. How do we establish trust today? Well, we have a bank, and we deposit our value or our money in a bank, and then we turn around and we write a check, or we initiate an electronic transfer, and that transfer has to be cleared back to the bank, and the bank looks and says, okay, does Chuck have enough money in his account to pay his Amex bill? When I use my American Express card someplace to make a purchase, I have to go and I give them the card, and they see that it's a valid American Express card. They run it through the system electronically. The system takes it, but I still have to. They have to clear with American Express so that they can establish trust that this transaction, the groceries that I just bought at Whole Foods Market, are in fact purchased by me, and the money should be transferred to Whole Foods. If you see what happens here in the traditional trust systems that we have, is we have some sort of centralized authority that is used to establish trust. Blockchain doesn't do that. It's different. Okay? And blockchain, from that standpoint, is very revolutionary. We have been using centralized trust authorities in our commerce since the beginning of time. These distributed ledger transactions also are different and revolutionary because the ledger is not just held within the confines of one individual player or one individual company. That ledger, those ledger transactions are spread out and are available to everybody else that's in the chain. There's a lot of different uses for the blockchain. There are uses for record keeping. There are uses for project management. There are uses for registration of equipment. The blockchain is safe, secure, and resistant. I mean, we have Experian, one of the biggest companies on the planet, for establishing trust. Establishing trust that your financial records and your credit scores and everything else will be kept, and your numbers and your information will be kept secure, and it blew up a month ago. The blockchain, on the other hand, creates those cryptologically defended records. It's distributed, and it's safe, and it's secure, and it's resistant also to hacking. The blockchain can trigger individual actions. We can take a blockchain, and when certain conditions are met in the blockchain, certain actions, a delivery is made, the repair of a piece of equipment or the installation of a system on something like a well site can be verified. That can then trigger another action, like, okay, initiate the invoice, or initiate a payment, or dispatch repair people to fix something. This whole elimination of the central authority seems very risky to a lot of people, but when you add the layer of making it safe, secure, and resistant, it starts to make a lot of sense for the blockchain. Now, I got to give you all a warning as we start to get into this, and I start to make statements that sound just crazy. But then when we start to back it up and show you the evidence and show you what it can do, that there's a warning to you, okay? There's areas of this blockchain that are just going to make you want to have to wrap your head to keep it from exploding, okay? So it's going to touch every aspect of our life. Let's take, for example, buying a home. I think everybody here online has bought a home at some point in time and paid somewhere between $700 and $1,000 or more to a property records check. They have to validate that the title search company, that's what it's called. Okay, you have to pay for a title search. First time you bought a home, you said, what the heck is this? What am I paying $800 for? And they say, well, we have to go to the courthouse and we have to make sure that there's no liens on this property, that in fact this property is legally held by the person you're buying it from, and we'll ensure that this is going to take place. And you're looking and saying, oh my gosh, what is he going to search? I'm pretty sure this thing is valid, because if it wasn't, somebody would have come after this guy. Why am I paying $800? Big system. Imagine, on the other hand, if those property records for transfer, the land was owned by some guy in the 19th century, it was transferred to somebody who owned it and then sold it to a property developer. He divided the property, showed what the dimensions were. There was a house that was put on it, or the house was put there originally. There's a building permit for it. There were changes to it. It's bought and sold 5 times. All that can be verified, not through a $900 or $1,000 property search, but probably in the course of about 5 minutes. Another piece that this would work for you is one person and many people. You could do something like maintain a system of property records or of equipment records, where you may have 30 or 40 people participating in a system that puts out equipment in an oil field. And this blockchain is involved with identifying the nomenclature and the type of the equipment and where it's located and how it's configured. One person or many people. They don't always have to be connected. Sometimes some are on, sometimes some are off. The blockchain can handle that, where sometimes the consolidated systems that we have. We think about device control. Device control is lacking in oil and gas right now. We don't know which data devices are at which well location, or which gathering system. We don't know what the model number are. We don't know the manufacturer. We don't have any idea where that stuff is. And with regards to truthful reporting, there's a lot of concern that some of the numbers that are produced can be spoofed or made false. We don't know that somebody can break in and send an invoice that's an invalid invoice, or somebody can break in with stealing some information or inserting some information into it. The blockchain will eliminate centralized bottlenecks. Remember, this is a distributed ledger system, so there's no one single point of failure, and if any one individual node on the blockchain is eliminated, the chain still works just as well without the one chain. The last one is the one that I really like right now, and that's project management. We have right now massive projects that go on, and we're using software that actually isn't all that good for the complexity of the organizations and the projects that we're running. We have silos across the organizations that have to participate in the project. We have no good way to ensure that everybody can participate with truthful reporting, with accurate reporting, and with the assurance that nothing's going to get spoofed in project management. Hard to describe some of the stuff with regard to the blockchain, but I will tell you that there's some limitations in midstream oil and gas for the blockchain on active SCADA, okay? If we look at the SCADA environment, applying the blockchain is going to be different based upon a couple of factors. One of them is just the geographic distribution. You know, factories are easier to do and control and initiate than oil fields simply because of the geography and the distances. There's plants like wastewater plants are easier to do than gathering systems. There's some systems that require distribution networks where the distances are there. Also, in SCADA systems right now that are installed and around in different locations, there's some limited computing power, not because they're bad systems, but because they're older systems when we ordinarily were unable to buy equipment. You've heard the story about the guys who went to the moon in 1969. They had all the best state-of-the-art computing power. And you'll hear often, I'm sure you've heard it, that the computing power in an Apple Watch or a smartphone far exceeds the combined computing power of the Apollo missions and NASA combined. So the same thing's working with SCADA. We have some computing power limitations with the legacy SCADA systems that are out there in the system. The older stuff that's combined right now in reporting with the newer stuff may not have the same capability so that we can employ the blockchain on it. The thing that I like the best in terms of helping us in SCADA in oil and gas is the potential for the blockchain to do device identification. You know, right now, I've sat in rooms with SCADA managers and asked them, you know, how many people here know where all the SCADA devices are in their oil field or in their system? And nobody raises their hand. You know, how many people know what the nomenclature is of the model numbers? What about the firmware version on that piece of equipment? You know, physical locations, who's changed things, changed settings, changed limits. How are those things maintained right now? And the answer is they're not. But people look and say, well, so what? Well, I'll tell you what. The maintenance and repair of a data node on, say, a tank on a gathering system in West Texas, okay? In order to just go out and look and say, this tank's not reporting anymore, we need to fix it. The cost of assembling and dispatching and sending out the technicians to that site far exceeds the cost of the equipment that they may have to change or reconfigure on that site. Now, that's a sobering thought when you realize that the equipment that they bring out may be wrong simply because they weren't sure what the device was that was out there. They didn't know the manufacturer, the name, the nomenclature, the firmware version. And quite frequently, we'll send people out in the field to fix something. They'll get there, and the biggest part of their task at the biggest expense is just identifying what's out there. the potential for device identification has significant impact on the cost of doing business. The second area that I think is great potential is the potential for project management. We spend a lot of time with our customers asking them to tell us what they want. And they write specifications, we try to fulfill them, but as we go along, we find that the discovery of what's required to actually make this equipment work is well beyond the scope of what the original specification was. That the number of silos or different parts of the company that impact how the system should be designed are in fact complicated and can't be predicted. And that's why these costs go out of hand. I was speaking to a senior executive with one of the big oil companies about a year ago, and commented about project management of small projects. And I said that, well, one of the strengths of our company is we help with project management, even on the small projects, because we're able to control the developmental costs, and we can keep it within 120, 130% of what the original budget was. And I was stone cold silence in the room. I was thinking, oh my gosh, I really stepped on it now. I told him that we were going to quote some number and then bill him at 130% of that number. And he smiled, he looked at me and he said, gee, I wish our projects were only over budget by 100%, 110%. I said, well, how do yours go? He says, usually they're 3 times the original prediction on the budget because there's no control. And one of the issues for no control is the project management software that's out there is centrally controlled. It's used by one person, and there's usually never enough time, effort, or energy put into identifying how that project is going and what the different factors are. Blockchain gives you the ability to put all this in this ledger system, this immutable, unchangeable record system, so that projects can be managed better. Project management software can validate completions, milestones, and more importantly, it can share with all the parties concerned a complete record of what's going on. Now, there's some challenges behind putting the blockchain into SCADA. Now, I think that blockchain is going to be out there. Blockchain is going to be out there in business and industry. Okay, where are you going to find it? Well, you're going to find it in virtual currency, and I might as well tip my hat here with regards to Bitcoin and how Bitcoin runs, because that's the word that you hear. Let me warn you that if you hear the word Bitcoin and you hear the word blockchain and you think Bitcoin is blockchain one-to-one, Bitcoin is only the tip of the iceberg. The stuff that's going to happen with blockchain far exceeds the capability with Bitcoin. And there are probably 24 virtual currencies in circulation right now other than Bitcoin. Only the tip of the iceberg. But some of the limitations that we have right now is that developed applications are scarce. This is a technology that started in about 2012. It's about 5 years old. It's rapidly catching on. The conferences are better attended. The number of people working are increasing. But developers are still scarce based upon what the need is. I think maybe the biggest piece of this is that the paradigm shift, the mental change that you have to make so that you can appreciate what the blockchain is doing and think differently, is probably the biggest limitation and barrier that we have right now. We have to get people to experience this and understand it, and then they will start to see. As I've become more aware and enthusiastic about blockchain, I consistently see application upon application where the blockchain can really transform what we're doing in business. And then the final piece that's difficult is some of the legacy software that we have out there that we have to interface with is kind of puny, and it's not working as well. And even the early blockchain development. Let me think about this for a second. If you remember way back when you did your first spreadsheet, there weren't too many functions in it. Well, now there's functions and widgets and drop and drag components that help you increase the ability to act on these things. That's what's going to happen right now in the next few years with blockchain. It's going to become more powerful and the applications more readily accessible. What are the opportunities for us in blockchain, particularly with regards to SCADA? Well, the first one is it's going to enable us to install systems that will enable us to collaborate across silos, companies, and teams. Whether you have large distributed organizations, whether you have partner companies, vendors can work with customers, customers can work with suppliers. It's going to provide a tremendous measure of intrusion protection, protection against third parties attacking your systems and inserting records to spoof your system. It causes you to go into in a false direction. I will tell you that once you start to look at the blockchain and understand it, it is virtually impossible to decipher and cheat or spoof a blockchain system, even if you had all the computing power in the United States working diligently to break that cipher hash or to break that cipher code. The kick is that not only do you have to brute force work through it, you have to do it in probably less than 10 minutes. It's just physically not possible. The cyber defense implications, work through it. Cyber defense for record keeping, for financial control. What's interesting from the cyber side, go back to the Bitcoin issue, is some of the bigger users of Bitcoin are apparently people on the wrong side of the law who are doing financial transactions that can't be traced. They know they can't be traced, they can't be hacked. That's why they're using them. You know, the crooks always seem to find the stuff that's most effective. And then, as we talked before, there's advantages for using the blockchain and SCADA for maintenance. Once we have decent ledgers on the blockchain of all the equipment that's out in the field, the cost of maintenance of these systems is going to come way down. And then the last one is on the project management side. If you initiate a blockchain project management system in your project effort, you're going to virtually eliminate the cost overruns, because you're going to have all the actions that change from the original plan are going to be recorded in the blockchain, and the provisions that are necessary to have that work approved. Right now we have project work that gets sidelined by field people or other parts of the organization who authorize changes to the design, changes from the original design in the application that wind up being unnecessary or gratuitous, and they result in some huge project cost overruns. Okay, what's my vision of the future? I guess I've been pretty bold in saying that the blockchain is going to do more to change the landscape in the next 10 years that the internet has in the last 20. What's the vision? What's the vision of the future? Let me go back out on the limb on a few things. Okay, now I think that project management in oil and gas and SCADA, in the segments that we're in, and the things that you all are in mostly, I think that project management will be the first application of the blockchain that gets some traction. I think that once that's become apparent and organizations see the value of the record keeping, that device registration and device identification will follow as the next one. However, SCADA will not be the first place that organizations will embrace the blockchain. Okay. It will be probably in finance and in some sort of formal record keeping, like personnel records, health records, things like that. I'll predict that there will be better application development tools for the software and the apps that are out there. We'll start to see a lot more programming power. I think that blockchain for SCADA will be implemented in factories long before it gets implemented in distributed systems like power grids, pipelines, oil fields. And that's primarily because they're centralized, they're located, they're in one facility, and the factories will go first. And the last prediction is that the developers will be the stars of the organization. The cyber warriors who seem to be the stars these days in IT will take a second chair to the blockchain people, simply because blockchain will do more, and will do more actually to provide protection. So you got to look at it. I'll encourage you all to say, if I've given you a taste of what the blockchain is, or if you're still confused and say, I'm really not sure, I don't understand what this is, I'm more than happy to correspond directly, either by voice and phone or by email, to give you a conversation, give you a little bit more of a heads up as to what's going on. We're going to continue to pursue some of the ideas here to see how that can work for our customers, and hopefully we've given you some inspiration or some interest in saying, okay, this blockchain thing is more than I thought it was, and I better take a look, and I better start to learn and get through it. So with that in mind, if there's any questions that anybody wants to type in there, I'll be more than happy to give it my best shot to answer.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Chuck. That was fantastic presentation. And yes, so we do have some questions already submitted, but before I get into those, I definitely would like to say, if you have a question for Chuck on blockchain or anything that he's talked about today, please submit that via the question panel here in GoToWebinar. I believe we had one person with their hand raised, so if you wouldn't mind sending that question in, that'd be great. So Chuck, let me kick it off on the Q&A portion here with a question that we've had sent in. Are Bitcoin and blockchain necessarily dependent on each other?
Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency which uses the blockchain in order to function. The blockchain doesn't need one of its applications, Bitcoin, in order to be viable and to function. There are several dozen cryptocurrencies that are presently in circulation. Bitcoin is the one which has the highest asset value, trades probably per coin at the highest rate, and is the one that's most common. There's actually an ATM here in the George R. Brown Convention Center in Houston where you can put your credit card in and you can buy Bitcoin on an ATM machine. So it's out there. But the direct answer is Bitcoin uses the blockchain, but the blockchain is not just Bitcoin. It's, like I say, the tip of the iceberg.
Okay, fantastic. So one question that was sent in, and I think this is a very good question for us to kind of dive into right at the front, is why do we need blockchain? What's the reason behind it?
Oh, needs a tough word. I think that blockchain provides a cyber defense that is better than any cyber defense technique that we've seen. It provides for a better use of the distributed internet around the world. In a lot of third world countries and a lot of countries in Asia, most of the value that's traded as a currency is traded from one smartphone to another smartphone. In other words, large percentages of those populations don't have any bank, but they trade in commerce, not in paper. They trade with their smartphones to buy groceries, to buy and sell, to pay and be paid. So I think that, gosh, what was the question again?
Well, so why do we need it? Like, why did blockchain come about in the first place? What was the kind of the driving force behind it?
The genesis was a paper that was written about 2010 or 11, I think, by a guy with a pseudonym of Satori, and he just proposed the idea. Do we absolutely need it? No. Do we need driverless cars? I don't think we need them. But do they provide a lot of advantages to us, and are they something to pursue? Absolutely. Did I need a smartphone in order to survive and to work in the business world? No, but it's a good piece of technology. So the world won't come to an end if we don't use blockchain. But like most technological innovations that have a lot of potential for value, I think it will be absorbed and used at some point in time. Organizations will realize that if they want to participate, they need to be on the blockchain. Similarly, there's no company out there that doesn't have an internet connection, doesn't use email, doesn't use text messaging. If they don't participate in that system, they won't prosper.
Okay, great. Mike just sent in a question. We're going to jump to that one. He asks, are there existing software platforms for the blockchain project management you described? He's very interested in this aspect.
Hi, Mike. There's some stuff. One of the other leading companies that's dealing in blockchain is called Ethereum, and Ethereum is designed to provide a kind of platform that will work well with project management. One of the issues here is, while I'm aware of large mega organizations that have blockchain initiatives in them, very few of them come forward and say, you know, here's what we're doing. But I know from speaking with individuals that there are groups of people inside that are doing them. Attended a conference at Rice University 2-3 months ago, had all of the leading authors and proponents of blockchain actually in the world, based upon their resumes and where they were being invited to speak. And there's a lot of momentum building, but like a lot of things, the start of the curve is a little slow and it starts to ramp up and accelerate. So I'm looking for, well, first thing I'm looking for on the project management side is a customer who wants to use that, and then we'll put it together with some project management stuff. But is there a place I can send you to that says, here's the project management software? I can't tell you that right now, but when I find one, Mike, I will email it to you and we'll let you know.
So Mike's follow-up question was, how far out do you think that is from that software existing?
Sometime before the summer of next year.
Okay, great. All right, so next question. It seems like blockchain is primarily a cybersecurity mechanism. Is that fair to say?
No, it's an information sharing mechanism. No more than, say, doing virtual banking using your smartphone is a security mechanism. It's a transactional mechanism that allows you to have a lot of flexibility of how you interface with your bank on the cloud. One of the advantages to the blockchain is that it provides some really sweet cybersecurity defenses by its very nature. But if you were concerned about the protection and the cyber protection of your data records, and wanted to employ the blockchain solely for that reason, it wouldn't be such a bad plan. But it's an aspect, and I suppose there will be users of the blockchain who will find the cybersecurity mechanism to be the primary reason and the primary advantage for using the system.
Okay. Another question we just had come in. And let me try to get through this, Chuck. So the question starts with, how has blockchain not already been come into being? And the question is, how do we stop hackers from introducing false updates to the chain? Something along the lines of Mt. Gox, where a trusted connection introduced unauthorized transactions.
Once the chain is established and each person in the blockchain has their own cipher key, just like you use a password on a secure system. And obviously, if that password gets compromised, then somebody can enter with your identification and create transactions using your password or your key, and those records will pass. But that's the same as any other system. I mean, if you give somebody the login and password for your bank account, they could probably flush your account. To date, I have not known of, read about, or heard of somebody who's come in and successfully been able to spoof that system. This is let's say a 256 or a 512K cryptographic hash that can get approved by the ledger system in, takes about 10 minutes. I know it takes about 10 minutes on the Bitcoin or the Ethereum chain for that transaction to be approved. If you can find a computer that can go through and decipher a chain that long in the 5 or 10 minutes it takes, then you have godlike qualities, because there's no computing system that we know of on the planet that can do that quickly. So right now it's safe. It looks to be safe for the long-term future. Is somebody going to come up with some genius way to beat around that system and hack it? I doubt it. But I guess I've been wrong before.
All right. Next question from Jeff. He asks, how do you initiate a blockchain and ensure that the next link in the chain is vetted?
If each chain, Jeff, is related to the previous chain, and there's a cryptologic hash that goes between the two, so if the hashes don't match, then the other nodes on the network will approve or deny, and that item will not be added into the block. So if the hash that gets generated by your record is not sequentially following or appropriately following the previous record, that record simply doesn't get admitted into the chain, and it just kind of kicks back to you. So kind of like when you go on a website and you enter the wrong password, and the website comes back and says, you got the wrong password, pal, try again.
Okay. Our next question is, do you intend in the future to integrate blockchain to any existing ERP systems?
Well, I tend to stay away from ERP systems because they tend to be monstrous things. The big thing for me on the business development side with any idea, including this, is, I got to find a customer, identify what it is they're trying to accomplish, and then we can tailor and start to create a system that'll work for them. So whether or not that integrates into ERP, I guess at some point in the future, that's a logical conclusion. But that's way over the horizon that I can see right now.
Okay. Our next question says, how does blockchain affect the future of traditional financial markets?
It levels the playing field for players. It eliminates the possibility of fraud and abuse. It will make banks, a lot of banking, totally irrelevant. The bank as the central repository and the clearinghouse and the establishment and maintenance of the trust authority will be irrelevant. The trust authority will exist without the bank. Jamie Dimon, the JP Morgan Chase CEO, came out in public and said, I don't know, a month ago, that blockchain and Bitcoin were a passing fad, and they were gonna go away. They wouldn't survive. And I just had to laugh, because Jamie Dimon wouldn't be saying something like that about something that's been so well established and has such a huge value right now, if he wasn't scared to death of it. I think that the blockchain is a threat to the traditional banking and investment institutions that pretty much control a lot of aspects of the economy, and it provides a lot more freedom and independence to individual players than they have right now.
Okay, our next question from Cal says, what might be the unintended consequences of if the idea took root of replacing socially grounded methods of generating trust with technologically distributed methods?
Wow. I think, Cal, that the socially generated methods of establishing trust are pretty much under assault on a daily basis, because people will use cash because they trust that somebody else will take the cash. There's trust in that. If somebody gives you an IOU, you're accepting that IOU based upon the social acceptance of that person. Do I think this will become depersonalized? No, because I think it will make individual transactions quicker, and the veracity of those transactions will be established much faster, so that if somebody attempts to give you a bogus payment for something, you'll know about it right away, as opposed to, 2 days later, you find out that your credit card is missing or your credit card number's been compromised. That's a great question. And now I really appreciate those people who are asked good questions that they really can't get a definitive answer to. So they say it was a good question, but it was a good question.
Well, it's certainly a thought-provoking one for sure. So our next question says, who are the key players in this space in terms of platform and provable solutions?
Ethereum's probably the highest visibility one. Obviously, in the cryptocurrency world, Bitcoin is. There's a couple of clearinghouses with it. There's a lot of ways to go. You can buy and sell some of these coins through some exchanges where you can use money. I mean, you can, if you have Bitcoin, you can buy stuff on Amazon with Bitcoin. A lot of people don't realize that. So there's not a lot of, there's no one big corporation that's come out and said, hey, I'm gonna be the leader. You have a lot of small operators and a lot of independent operators who are grabbing hold of this idea. They like it, kind of the purview of the entrepreneurial computer nerd and the guy who comes up with an idea. Years ago, there was a guy who thought he could sell books online through a website, and it was Jeff Bezos who became Amazon. HP started, Hewlett Packard started in a guy's garage, and Microsoft started with two nerds from Seattle. So I see a similar kind of pattern going on with some very entrepreneurial and some very creative and some extremely hardworking people, which is true of most technological developments that become transformative to the economy.
Fantastic. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to submit them. We've got one that just came in. Chuck, it says, is altering the chain more challenging than a ledger in cases where errors are made? For example, it seems like anyone who sends their Bitcoins to a wrong address can potentially lose them forever. You don't typically lose your money when it is sent to a wrong bank account. Does blockchain make a muddier situation when making corrections?
Yep. Yeah, if you give your money to somebody who's the wrong person, chances are you won't get it back. Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's the same kind of care that you have to take when you're, it used to be that if we put something online on the internet and used a credit card to buy something and we had a password, it was safe. Now we know that you can't go to Starbucks and use the public Wi-Fi because somebody's going to be looking at that. So you got to be careful there with what you do, even though the transaction is probably secure. I mean, heck, you can't even, if you travel internationally, they say that you should have RFID protection on your credit cards because there's guys who walk by and scan your credit card right out of your pocket. And then of course there's the ATM machine with the little gizmo on it that's really spoofing and grabbing the name of your credit card, or the gas station pay machine. So yeah, there still needs to be a fair amount of prudence in who you share your information and do your information with. Are you able to go back to American Express and say, okay, this, eat the charges, reverse the charges on this transaction because I got cheated by the vendor? Yeah, you won't be able to do that with the blockchain. I agree.
Okay. Next question is, do you know anyone that is currently using blockchain in SCADA, or how far out do you think that is?
No, and I think that the biggest issue that we have is the paradigm shift. I gave fundamentally this presentation in Denver. The room was filled. It was standing room only. More people were coming in, and a lot of them were scratching their head trying to understand it. When I first saw this, I thought, that's interesting. But I couldn't for the life of me understand what the heck it was. And I must have spent a month reading and studying and looking, and finally the doggone thing clicked in my head. I realized what it is. This paradigm shift issue, I think, is of paramount importance with people. But that's true of any technological change that we've made, or any fundamental change that we've made in the way we do business, where you've got to get people to think differently. Uber and Airbnb and Amazon, those are all
huge paradigm shifts that we had to go through for everybody individually. And some people just couldn't embrace it right away. And after a while, they finally have. So it's a process. But for those people who are involved with early development, they're almost evangelical in their enthusiasm for promoting the idea.
Great. Our next question, and we do have quite a list of questions, so if you've submitted a question, please be patient. We'll be getting to it here in just a minute. Next question that came in, Chuck, I wanted to throw out to you. You mentioned Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase earlier. Someone also noted that the Chinese are preventing the use of Bitcoin within their economy. Can you talk about that and what it means for the future of Bitcoin and blockchain? And in relation to that, what are the things that could happen that cause blockchain to not impact the future in the way you're describing?
Well, I think the Chinese are going to be terribly unsuccessful in limiting and blocking blockchain. Interestingly enough, so one of the methods with cryptocurrency is some of the nodes on the network are set up as validators or miners. They mine the transaction register. They validate the cryptology key between each successive ledger entry, and they give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And when enough nodes on that network approve it, or they all agree that it's secure, that it's appropriate, then the threshold is crossed and the item gets put in the block or in the chain. So there's an awful lot of Bitcoin mining that goes on inside of China. So I think that while the government likes to control things, the Chinese are immensely resourceful and very economic in their thinking. They're very entrepreneurial in their action. To me, the Chinese saying you can't do Bitcoin or you can't do blockchain is a sure sign that they're scared to death of it, because they believe that people can get this collective trust mechanism that doesn't rely on the government who's trying to control things. And actually that pretty much goes for every government I can think of on the planet.
All right, so next question, this is a pretty long one, so bear with me, Chuck. So Cal says, blockchain is eerily reminiscent to him of the Hawala system. He says he's all for blockchain as a paradigm shift away from centralized banking. It is interesting to note that the big banks are investing billions of dollars into cryptocurrency and advancements into their own version of blockchain in an attempt that they wish to beat regulations on compliance issues. But that's too late. New York City already has governance on Bitcoin trading, and the big banks are next. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Cal, I'm not familiar enough with that system that this reminds you of. One of the interesting things about how this thing controls on blockchain is because it's on the internet, and because it's peer-to-peer, and because it's a distributed system, there's pretty much no national boundaries that can be maintained and enforced. So do I think there's going to have to be reconciliation among things like, well, you got criminal activity for one, you have taxation rules for another. But you remember we had this sales tax issue with Amazon, and by state, where you bought something on Amazon and you didn't get hit for sales tax. If you went up to Circuit City, you had to pay sales tax on it. So that got resolved. Do I think that there will be people who will use this system for nefarious or extra legal means? Absolutely. But I also think that people use cars as getaways to commit crimes, and the nature of man will not be changed, and this will be a very effective method for people hiding a lot of transactions and being able to execute those transactions transnationally and hide stuff. So yeah, this, like every other social change, is not going to come without some difficulty. And whenever something starts to work, you're going to have somebody in the government turn around and decide they think it needs to be regulated according to their rules. I find blockchain to be an egalitarian and a very democratic process. And generally speaking, governments tend to limit that independence and that, governments want control. And blockchain is something that can skirt a lot of the typical financial and other informational transactional records that can be controlled now.
Okay, a couple more questions that have come in. Somi asks, what is your advice to companies or startups to get involved with blockchain, and what aspects should they start to ponder first?
I think that they should create somewhat of a skunkworks type organization inside their company to look at understanding the blockchain. That leadership should open up their eyes and their minds to try to understand how this might affect their business, and allow these skunkworks type entrepreneurial set-asides inside their own organization to identify ways that might work. They then ought to pick some sort of record-keeping mechanism inside the company, commit that to the blockchain, see how it works, work some kinks out of it, and then wait to see, because if this works for them, which I'm pretty sure it will, that will open up everybody's eyes as to what the next step should be for further development. It's like every transformational thing, or every new idea that requires a shift in thinking. If you try to use the traditional organizational structure to embrace a radical new idea and implement it inside the traditional structure, you'll probably screw it up.
Okay. Our last question from Craig says, is there a significant cost to migrate to blockchain from a more traditional data management methodology?
Based upon the size of the institution, what has to be taken down. I think that these systems kind of, they grow by themselves and they take on new life. And you don't have to necessarily dismantle one system so that the blockchain can take over. I found with, I've bought some Bitcoin and some Ethereum and let it sit. It was separate from the rest of my portfolios and stuff. It's taken on a new life according to other, the value that's increased. So I haven't tried to transform what I'm doing into Bitcoin or blockchain stuff. On the record keeping side, I think as the system starts to work on a limited scale, individuals will start to see the benefit and will start to morph it. We saw the same thing with plain old SCADA. I mean, years ago, several decades ago, we were measuring temperatures, pressures, flows with analog meters, guys with clipboards, and we turned around and said, well, you can use all this automation, and but we didn't necessarily do it on let's replace all the traditional methods and then start tomorrow and do everything with automation. The automation just started to grow, take root, and eventually the traditional system faded out and went away. And that's what I think. Look at your banking. How many people here even know where your checkbook is? We started looking at virtual banking. We started looking at paying bills online, checking our accounts online, and now we have almost the equivalent of a digital currency. That's the kind of transformation that was gradual, and the better system subsumes the inferior system a little bit at a time, and then a lot at a time.
Great. So we just now hit the top of the hour, and we realize everybody's got a busy schedule. So we appreciate your time. We absolutely welcome additional questions if you would like to reach out to us or to Chuck to talk about Bitcoin or blockchain further. and how it could affect your company, please feel free to do so through our website. And we appreciate you joining us today. Chuck, thank you so much for the presentation, and the Q&A session was fantastic.
And I thank you, everybody, for taking an hour out of their day to listen and hear some ideas. And please feel free to share me your thoughts and your ideas. Have a great day. And by the way, go Astros to be world champions of baseball. Looking forward to seeing a clean sweep of the 3 games here at home.
That would be awesome. Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. And we will be posting the recording of today's webinar on the GlobalLogix website and sending a link out to everybody. So be on the lookout for that. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.